Hi, I'm Laura.
I am Deanne.
So we're gonna try doing a Lymond read video thing since we're in quarantine, and this is one of my favorite books. And Dee read it many years ago and hasn't read it in a while. And we're in quarantine, we don't have anything else to do, so we're going to do this. Um, so first of all, a warning, there is going to be spoilers. We're not going to pretend like we don't know what's going to happen. So if you have never read it before and you don't want to be spoiled, don't watch this. Read it first, please. If you don't mind spoilers, then come along with us and enjoy. So just in terms of background about ourselves, I have been a Lymond fan for I think like 14 years. I first read it in 2004, no, 2006. Can't count. And what happened was I was a fan of Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Jaime Lannister from Game of Thrones. And at the time, everyone in fandom was saying, or people in fandom were saying, if you like those characters, you will love Frances Crawford of Lymond. You have to read these books. And after many people saying that, I finally got a hold of the book and I took it with me on a bus ride from New York City to Atlantic City to see Alice in Chains. It was the only thing I had on the bus, so I had no choice but to read it. I started reading it. I was like, this is insane. Does she actually expect me to keep track of all these characters? But since I didn't have anything else to do, I kept reading. I kind of like hummed at the Drunken Pig, and then I got to around page 100 with the Spaniard, laughed my ass off, fell in love with it. I took it with me in the queue to see the band, in the mosh pit waiting for the band to come on, read it on the bus home from Atlantic City, got home at like 4 in the morning in New York, stayed up reading it until 2 p.m. the next day. I couldn't stop until I finished it. Went to bed at 2 p.m. having finished it, woke up that evening and started reading it again. And since then, of course, I've read all of them, and I've done various Lymond-related travels as well, which we'll talk about when we get to those parts of the books. I'll share whatever Lymond things I found in those places. So that's me. Dee.
Okay, so I read this book. This is my copy from either 1998 or 1999 is when I got this copy. I was living in China at the time, and this is in the very early days of the internet, dial-up and really, really poor dial-up in Northeast China. And Amazon, it was also the very, very early days of Amazon. And so it only sold books. And it was the only bookstore that I knew of that would deliver internationally to the city that I lived in China. So I have no idea why I bought this particular book. I cannot remember. Somebody must have recommended it to me. But it was very expensive, and so it was very precious. And I read it while I was in China. I didn't have a lot of English books with me, so I definitely read it. I have zero memory of the content of this book, other than I liked the main character. I enjoyed the book. I read the second book because I bought both of them at once. But then I realized when doing this rereading with Laura that I haven't read past the second book. Because I don't have past the second book. I only have the first two. But I don't care about spoilers. So Laura's going to spoil things. I don't care about them. But definitely we do want to warn you, if you care about spoilers, then be careful, because we're going to talk about stuff that's coming up. However, I don't remember anything. So I'm going to be approaching this just almost as a cold reading, and as a somewhat confused reader. So that's where I am.
So we're going to start with a quick recap of the first part that we read, and then we'll get into discussion about it. So we read, for this session, we read Opening Gambit, and we read Section 1, Chapter 1. So I'll do the summary this time, and then we'll trade off next time. So in the Opening Gambit, what happens is that Frances Crawford of Lymond arrives back in Edinburgh by sneaking in on a smuggler's ship, and he's an outlaw, and we learn that he's the younger brother to a baron, Lord Coulter. So Lymond meets up with his men, who update him on the news. The big thing being it's the eve of an English attack on Scotland to force the child of Mary Queen of Scots to marry Edward, who's the young king of England. Lymond breaks into the house of a smuggler named Mungo Tennant, and he eavesdrops on the conversation between Mungo and two Scottish noblemen, Wat Scott of Buccleuch and Tom Erskine. And they're talking about the upcoming English invasion and the risk to Scotland because a lot of the Scots who should be protecting Scotland have been paid off by the English. And in particular, they're worried about Lord Coulter, which is Lymond's brother, because he refuses to hunt down Lymond, who's a traitor. So they don't know if they can trust Coulter either. And they talk also about maybe the fact that Coulter won't hunt down his brothers because he just got married, but either way, he really needs to bring himself to hunt down his brother. Lymond then reveals himself with a well-timed sneeze. He mocks them. He escapes via the smuggler's cellar, and he uses the distraction of having gotten the pig, who is the pet of the house, drunk.
I just say, don't forget the drunken pig.
Yeah. Definitely the first time I read this, I was just like, what is going on? You got the pig drunk. So then we cut to Lymond's family's castle, where his mother, Sibylla, is holding a party with the local ladies to celebrate his brother's new wife, Marietta. And his mother is talking to Buccleuch's wife. So Buccleuch, Watcott being the guy we met in the first scene, this is his wife, who's talking to Lymond's mother, and they're talking about Buccleuch's oldest son, Will Scott. Will Scott basically went off to college and learned moral philosophy, and he's come home and he's driving his family crazy because he doesn't like that his father has had to make moral compromises, and he just sounds like a really typical teenager. Janet then brings up Lymond, and Sibylla doesn't want to talk about it and changes the subject. So then Lymond breaks in. He flirts with Marietta, his brother's new wife. He threatens and robs the women. He threatens his brother. He locks the women inside, and then he sets the castle on fire.
Stabbing one of them.
Oh yeah, and he stabs
his wife.
Pregnant, yes. Yeah. Good job, Lymond. Meanwhile, at the nearby castle Bog Hall, Richard, which is Lymond's brother, Lord Coulter, is talking to Watcott of Buccleuch, and Christian Stewart is also there. She's an intelligent young noblewoman who happens to be blind. And kind of carrying on from the first conversation that had Buccleuch in it, Buccleuch is trying to convince Richard to hunt down Lymond, and he basically tells him that if the Scots can't trust him, they're gonna have to keep their eye on him, and a lot of Scottish people are gonna die if they can't trust Richard. So like Richard has to hunt down his brother in order to save Scottish lives. Christian then smells smoke coming from the direction of Mid Coulter, which is Lymond's family castle. So then Richard runs off, gets there in time, rescues the women, and swears that he actually will hunt down his brother after all. But first they have to go fight a battle. And we get this kind of omniscient narrator's overview of the political situation in Europe at the time. Henry VIII having just died, Francois I having just died. Basically Europe is poised delicately over a brand new board, like a chessboard. So it's kind of like the old figures have died, the new figures are coming in, and what's gonna happen next. So that's our opening gambit. Anything to add, Dee, before I then jump into part 1, chapter 1?
No, do the summary of the second chapter or part 1, chapter 1, and then we can talk about all of it. Except for the fact that I have got to read up on chess because I don't play chess, and all of the chess references are just going right over my head. Particularly because some of them seem to be in French, which I do not read. So
yeah, I do understand it. The quotes are from this very old book about chess that's like it's like chess as a metaphor for life. Anyway, so in part 1, chapter 1, starts off with the Scottish losing the Battle of Pinkie, which we hear about, but the English don't manage to capture the Scottish Queen. And then meanwhile, we observe through the eyes of 2 of Lymond's men, Johnny Bullough and Turkey Matt, as Lymond arrives back at his outlaw camp, and he's brought with him Will Scott, which is Buccleuch's son, who Janet and Sibylla were talking about in the previous chapter. Will says he wants to join Lymond's outlaw gang. Lymond puts him through a whole bunch of tests, physical tests, intellectual tests, makes fun of him relentlessly, makes him swear an oath of loyalty, and then says, no, I don't want you after all. And then Will basically says that he's run away from home and he's totally going to join an outlaw gang, and so then Lymond accepts him. And there is an important bit of foreshadowing here where Turkey Matt, who's kind of Lymond's second in command, says about Will, he says he'll wait till we're settled, oath or no oath, and then bring Buccleuch and the rest down on top of us. And Lymond says, oh no, he won't. He's going to be a naughty, naughty rogue like you and me. And the spoiler here is that Turkey Matt is right and Lymond is wrong. Lymond, not always right. Anyway, Lymond and Will go to then the town of Annan, which has just been captured by the English. And there's, I think, an important moment at the beginning where Lymond stops to look down at the town on fire and laughs about it. And then he tells Will that he's taken him on because Will can read and write, and that's useful to him, and that he's going to Annan to find an Englishman named Jonathan Crouch, but we don't know why he's looking for Jonathan Crouch yet. And he tells Will that the English are against him and that they have a price on his head too. So then Lymond kind of bluffs his way in by mocking the guards at the gate, calling their clothes and sword filthy. One of my favorite lines is when the guard threatens to stab him, Lymond says, "Well, if you do, for God's sake, use someone else's sword." Once the captain comes, then Lymond is on his best behavior. He gets in with a password and he asks to speak to Jonathan Crouch. But the captain won't let him leave without, well, first of all, he says Jonathan Crouch isn't there. Second of all, Lymond had thought that this other messenger, Charlie Bannister, was supposed to be there, but he's not there. Lymond had told his men to make sure he got there. He didn't. So then the captain says, "I can't let you leave without talking to the commanders." So then Lymond and Will have to kind of go with him and go to talk to the commanders, which is obviously going to get Lymond in trouble. Lymond, what he manages to do is convince the captain to get the son of one of the English commanders, Lord Wharton, whose name is Harry Wharton, to come with them. And then Lymond and Will attack them, and they kind of capture Harry and the captain, and they convince Harry to take them to his father. So then Lymond and Will, along with the captain and Harry Wharton, are taken to the two commanders at Annan of the English, Lord Wharton and the Earl of Lennox, Matthew Stewart. And it's clear from the get-go that they cannot stand Lymond, they don't trust him either, and that Lymond and Lennox have a personal background and a dislike, and that apparently Lymond had been on the galleys as a prisoner of the French, and Lennox is the one who rescued him, and then Lymond betrayed him. Lennox himself is also a traitor to Scotland who betrayed the Queen and took a bunch of money and then turned over to the English. So they kind of mock each other back and forth about that stuff. And in particular, there's some kind of background that we don't know all the details of between Lymond and Lennox's wife, Margaret Lennox. And Lymond makes a particular insult about her where he says, "I was brought up in bad company from oar to oar." Like oar. It drives them all nuts. Robs them, and then he and Will escape. And as a distraction, Lymond drops a heated helmet on Harry Wharton's head. Lymond's men then surround Richard's men who are coming back from the Battle of Pinkie. They find the messenger, Charlie Bannister. They let him go. And then Lymond shows up, threatens his brother. He tells the English and Richard, he tells them both that the English have triumphed and are marching north to take Stirling, which is where the Scottish Queen is. And then Tom Erskine's men arrive. There's a whole melee that ensues, and as Lymond leaves, he shouts a challenge to Richard that he'll meet him at the Popinjay in the next Stirling Wappenshaw.
Yes.
Anything to add?
No, except that one of the things I'm struggling with right now, and I'm thinking from your introduction, I just haven't got 100 pages in because I don't care about any of these people yet. So, and I'm sure that I will. Like, I know that I'm going to care about them at some point, but I chose not to read ahead because we're kind of trying to do this on a schedule, and so I want to stay with the schedule. So I didn't read any further. But I really don't care about anybody, including Lymond. Like, except he intrigues me a little bit. There's been a couple moments where he's done something like, "Oh, okay, I think I might like you," where the quote where you mentioned where he's sort of teasing the guard, or there's a point where he's got a little back and forth with his mother that I think was kind of intriguing. The fact that he just stabs the woman with his mother, I'm like, okay. He's just like, and it's clear like he stabs her in the shoulder. Like he's actually, the books makes it clear that he's actually intentionally wounded her in a way that she'll most likely survive easily. But still it's like, okay, just stabbed her. And there was something else. I mean, the drunken pig was really funny. I think the points where Lymond is talking, I really enjoy. everything else is like, what is going on? You know, it's so complicated. There's at least 4 factions that we're trying to deal with, I think. There's the Scottish in general. Then we've got Lymond's brother, who's kind of at odds with them in some ways. Then we've got Lymond and his men, who are at odds with both the Scottish and his brother and the English. Yep. That's at least 4. And trying to keep track of, like, it's just a lot to dump in these first pages.
It definitely is. One thing that drove me crazy and that helped a lot was she calls people by different names all the time.
Yeah.
And it's really, like, infuriating to try to keep track. So there's the little...
Which is typical of this era of novel. Like, when you read and it's typical of this era of time, you know, people would have their family last name, they would have their... the name of the seat, like the land that they live on. So that name would be a name that people would call them. Their given name would be a name that people would call them. You know,
yeah.
Like,
I think that she does it really cleverly, where she uses a name based on what she's telling you about the character, or like what state the character's in, or how we're supposed to be perceiving the character. And she does it in particular with Lymond, where it actually kind of, she calls attention to it in this chapter, where his mother calls him Francis and he tells her to call him Lymond.
Right.
She's trying to call him, like, she's trying to connect in a personal way, and he puts his wall and
right. It would be an intimacy here. Yeah.
And then Will Scott often thinks of him as the master, which I just remember at first being like, what? But it actually makes a lot of sense, because that's how Will sees him, as this, like, super confident and, like, arrogant person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it reminds me kind of how, like, Byron's real name was George Gordon, but nobody calls him Mr. Gordon, you know, even though that would be a completely appropriate thing to call Lord Byron. Or George, you know, like, we don't call him that either. So, you know, just like, yeah. And I noticed his mother calling him Francis, being like trying to create that bond of intimacy. Like, I call you by your given name, which would be a very intimate and rare thing for someone to do. But yeah, then I'm super curious about the backstory between him and his mother. Like, okay. What's going on there?
So let me show a couple of pictures that set the scene from some of the stuff that happens in this chapter, and then we can keep going with conversation. Here is, this is a picture of the castle in Edinburgh, and what you see here is currently the Princess Street Gardens, but at the time, this was the Norloch that Lymond swims through. This used to be water, and then they drained it and made gardens. So this I thought was really cool, to be like, oh wow, I'm standing in the spot where Lymond, like, swam up.
Yeah, okay.
And then because he comes in at night, let's see if I can. Nope. There we go. So here's the castle at night. And then here is it again. You can see how big it is. So just want to kind of set the scene of Edinburgh Castle at night. And then this would
be where the queen was, the baby queen.
Was she in the castle? I can't remember if she was in the castle, but
I can't remember either. But she was in some sort of walled enclosure that the English didn't get to. At least that's what they said in the chapter.
Definitely when Lymond swims up, he's like, there's like the scene of the castle in the distance, like, reflecting on the water of the Norloch.
Yeah.
This is the Sir Walter Scott Monument in Edinburgh, which I just thought was cool for a couple of reasons. One being Sir Walter Scott, a famous Scottish historical novelist who obviously inspired Dunnett in some ways. And then also the fact that he's a member of the Scott family, so technically a relative of Clue and Will Scott. This is a close, I don't know how you say it, of Edinburgh, which is these like really narrow little like sort of streets that are like stepped. And so every time they're talking about Edinburgh and they talk about a close, it's like one of these little narrow streets. which I didn't know until I went there.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is, I went on tour in these underground vaults, which you can go to Edinburgh if you're not in a pandemic, and you can tour. And these are not the ones that lead up to Mungo Tennant's Smuggler's Cellar, but they're probably similar. So I just thought that was cool.
Yeah. So they'd be like underground smugglers would use them kind of thing.
Exactly. And then there was one other thing that I thought was kind of cool, which is, she describes Lymond as parting the waters like an oriflamme or oriflame. And I was like, what the hell is that? And it's like this thing. So you can see a picture of it. And there it is, like in battle. So it's like this kind of like brightly colored thing. He's got this bright hair, like parting the waters at night. And then the other thing I thought that would be fun to look at is some fan art. And so we'll try to look at this every time we do this. If there happens to be any fan art that I can find that is about the chapter we read. So this I thought was sort of fun. This one is by Lynova Draws on Tumblr, and it's a giant Lymond. Let's see.
What's he holding?
I don't know what that is. I guess you can kind of
figure of something.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like the king or something. Oh, it's the chess piece.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah, it's probably the king.
And there's some detail. I thought that one was cute.
Yeah.
And then here's another one by Bella Rowe on DeviantArt of the Crawford siblings. So there's Richard, Francis, and little sister Eloise, who died.
Died, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's dead at this point. Okay. Do we know what's happened to their father? That
we know that he died violently on the field, but we don't know any more about it.
Okay. Okay. I mean, obviously he's dead because Richard is the Baron, but yeah. Okay. So Richard's 10 years older than Francis.
Yes.
Okay.
And then here's another one from Bella Rose. This one's on Tumblr, which is that scene that we just saw or just read with Sibylla, Marietta, Lymond, and Richard. And I like this one. She's put like little quotes from each of them in it.
Okay.
And then two more. This one is Will Scott being interrogated and kind of tested by Lymond and his men.
Okay.
And this one is the flaming helmet that he drops on Harry Wharton's head.
Okay. All right. Nice.
So I want to share some of my favorite quotes, and maybe we can like jump off into discussion wherever you want.
Okay.
All right. So one of my favorite things about the chapter is the way that it starts out, because it sets the tone and the themes of the book and the rest of the series. And it starts with the quote of Lymond is back. And so it's people talking about Lymond.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, it's men talking about Lymond, and they're all kind of like with contempt, with disgust. And then there's the line, only sometimes a woman's voice would say it with a different note, and then laugh a little. Mm-hmm. So we immediately get this idea that the men don't like him very much, but the women do.
Yeah. It sort of reminded me when I was reading it of like the movies from say like the 30s and the 40s, those movies where you would have a scene where like people would be gathered around talking about an absent character, and it would just be like this very witty exchange of, you know, have you heard that, you know, and then of course the absent character is the main character who's going to come on screen.
Yep. And one of the things I like about this, the way it sets up the series, is that we almost never get Lymond's point of view. We're always seeing him through someone else's eyes. So here we're set up with this starting point of seeing him and hearing about him through the voices of other people. So already we don't know like what's the truth. Are the men right? Are the women right? Are they all right? And so there's like this mystery and this ambiguity around him. And we kind of have to piece together what's really going on from how all these other people see him. And I kind of like that sometimes a woman's voice would say it with a different note and laugh a little, because it implies like, oh, he could be really hot. But there's also this layer, which we kind of learn more about him later, which is that he like really gets along well with women and has great conversations with them. So maybe it's not as like titillating as it sounds initially.
Yeah, maybe they just don't hate him. Like they might have, it's interesting to think about a main character in a story not being the point of view character. And I can't think of a modern novel right off the top of my head that does that. I'm sure there are, but we're so used to being sympathetic with characters because we see their point of view. Like that's, in fact, as an English teacher, like I often teach that, like the point of view character is the character you sympathize with, or that instead of having good guys or bad guys, you have like the characters you sympathize with and the characters you don't. So the protagonist is going to be the character you sympathize with, and it's often the point of view character. And so to have our main character that is our protagonist not be our point of view character is interesting.
It lets her pull a lot of interesting tricks. Like she can keep his motivations ambiguous, but she can pull tricks with the audience sympathy by having everyone else against him and showing you little slivers of sympatheticness so that you feel protective of him. Which would be also much harder. I think actually one of the interesting things is that as we get to know Lymond more and more, he's this like super sensitive person actually, and this really emotional person underneath it all. And if we were in his head the whole time, we would probably get annoyed with his melodrama, to be honest. But because we're not in his head, every little sliver of humanity is like, oh, he's human. Oh, I feel his humanity.
Yay. Okay, so share some quotes. What are ones that you like?
Okay, so a couple other ones I thought are fun. So there's a line about Lymond's own men wondered briefly without concern how he proposed to penetrate a walled city to reach them, which is a really...
They don't know how he's going to do it, but they don't care because he's going to do it.
Yeah, it's a really concise way of telling us a bunch of things. Like he's really confident, his men know he's confident. Also, they're not like emotionally attached to him. They're not like, oh, worried or anything. It's just like he's super confident, he's gonna get in, and they're not really worried.
He's very like, I feel like she's setting up, it's a very Robin Hood trope at this point. At least that's what it feels like to me. I mean, even to the point of having Will Scott sort of sound like Will Scarlet. Like to me, that was the image that I had when he joined. It was just Robin Hood and his merry men, and Will Scarlet comes up and wants to join the gang. And so Robin Hood's kind of like, I don't know, who are you? And then he joins the gang and that. So I feel like I've been set up to trust Will Scott because I trust Will Scarlet from Robin Hood stories, and it just feels so similar that it's kind of another way that if Will Scott is going to betray Lymond, I'm going to be surprised, because that's not obviously he is, but like that's not the story that I'm expecting at this point. But yeah, right now he's Robin Hood to me. So I'm kind of looking for things like, okay, how is he not Robin Hood?
No, he's totally Robin Hood, and there's a point at some point later in the book where there's like an explicit Robin Hood reference, so she's playing with it. Funnily enough, Will Scott actually is a real historical figure, so it's not like she chose that name just to sound like Will Scarlet, but it totally like plays in the show.
Yeah. And that actually brings up something I'm curious about. Who in these books are historical figures that she's playing with, and how much does she play with them? And then who is made up? Obviously Lymond is made up, but how many of these people are historical?
She's meticulously historically accurate, and most of these characters are real. Lymond, his brother, his mother, they're all fictional, and Christian Stewart is fictional, but everybody else, Buccleuch, Will Scott, Janet, Tom Erskine, they're all real. And nothing in her take on them is like contradictory to what they were actually like.
Wow. Did she have them like at the actual locations they were at when they were at them and stuff like that?
Pretty much anything that like can be found in the historical records, she doesn't contradict it.
Mm.
Yeah. And I like that she gets like their personalities, like all the personalities of her characters match like what we know about the characters if we know something about their personalities. Some of them we don't know enough, but no, she did. The other thing that was like so cool about her and that makes her such a fun person to be inspired by to travel is that she actually went to all these places and did a lot of primary source historical research herself. So there's stuff in her books that like you don't find in most history books, and it's often because it's from some like paper map in like a dusty old library that's not even on the internet.
Yeah. Wow.
So a couple other
I want an annotated copy. Like, I'm dying that I can't have an annotated Game of Kings, that I can't just have footnote after footnote after footnote. Like, that's what I want. As I read through, I want like half a page of the novel and then like half a page of footnotes. And that's,
I have some, I guess, advice about that, and it's two things. The first one is the first time I read it, I'm really glad that I read it without that, because I was on a bus and I only had the book, so I couldn't look anything up, and I had to just keep going, which is basically that you don't have to have annotations to understand what's going on. You can, and like I didn't understand most of the foreign language quotations or anything, but I could still understand enough to like get super into the story. And it's good to have that momentum so that you're not like stopping and looking things up. But then it's also super rewarding to go back after you read it and to have those things, because then it's like it's like a punch drunk show, like immersive theater, where you go back and get more out of it every time. There's so many layers in these books that even though I've read them like a ton of times now, I'm always discovering new things. So I wanted to share some cool stuff that exists out there. Now's probably a good time. Yeah. First of all, there's this translation guide to the Lymond Chronicles by Nancy Wright. And it's literally just translations of all the foreign text, like that's in the book. So that'll tell you like literally what the words say, but it won't always tell you like what the source is or what the context is. Like there's lots of quotations in foreign language, so it'll tell you the words, but it won't tell you like the rest of what goes around it. But then there's another one, which is by Laura Kane Ramsey, The Ultimate Guide to Dorothy Dunnett's Game of Kings. And this one is just Game of Kings. It's not the whole series. And it goes in chronological order with the book, but it gives you like the context of the quote. So it'll give you like
that's cool.
So it'll give you like the background of the characters. It'll give you like more of the mythology. If it's a mythological character, to explain like who the character is. If it's a quote from a specific thing, it might have like more of that text, so you can understand like what that story is actually about.
This one right here, yeah.
And then
I feel like it's a bunch of like foreshadowing that's happening that I'm not picking up on, because if you pick a particular quote from a particular situation, it could be that the situation is the foreshadow, not necessarily the quote. And I feel like there's some of that going on.
There definitely is, and there's like layers of meaning that you kind of like dig out of it as you like read these things. But again, it's more color. It's not essential to the understanding of what's going on. There's also just one more I want to share, the Dorothy Dunnett Companion, and this is like more like a dictionary or encyclopedia where you look things up based on alphabetical order. So if there's a quote and you're like, oh my god, what does that thing mean, you'll be able to find it alphabetically a lot of times and get context about it. And the cool thing about this one is it was written when Dunnett was alive and she collaborated on some of it, so there is some stuff in here that's like really accurate and really interesting. And then, one more, which is called The Lymond Poetry. And this one is the full source of a bunch of the quotations that are like poetry quotations that are in the books, some of which were translated by Dunnett herself. So there's all kinds of like layers of meaning in those things.
Yeah.
Anyway, so maybe we'll have to get you a copy, but you don't have to have one.
Yeah. I mean, my trivia huge desire for knowledge part of me just wants to be like, what's that as I'm reading through. And it's hard. I kept, as I was reading, I kept having to tell myself, like, don't look it up, like, just keep going, because I just kept wanting to stop and be like, wait, who's that, just like Google. And so I had to not do that.
There's a certain point I always hit where I get like so into the story that I just like can't stop reading.
Yeah.
But it is really rich to look things up. The other thing I have recently listened to audiobooks, and they're really fun because it's like being on a roller coaster. You can't stop for anything, so you just kind of have to go with the flow. And I think you get obviously less of like the specific, like what did that thing mean, but you get some of the bigger picture connections between scenes and like thematic like through lines more clearly when you're listening to it because it goes faster.
Who's reading the audiobooks? Do they have like a nice Scottish accent?
Yeah. I don't know the person's name offhand, but there's an original edition and a newer edition, and I really like the new one. You can get it on like Audible or any of those mainstream audiobook sites. It's pretty good. Apparently the French is terrible, but I don't speak French, so I don't really know.
Yeah, me neither.
So a few more fun quotes, I guess.
Okay.
So there's a line very early at the beginning in Mungo Tennant's house when the steward is breaking in to get the pig drunk. So the steward answers the door and it says, the steward asked Hob in the vernacular, digressing every second or third word what he wanted, which is like the classiest way ever of being like, cursed him out for waking him up. And then there's also
vernacular, like
digressing every second or third word. And then there's a scene at the end when Mungo Tennant, the guy that owns the house, is trying to stop Tom Erskine and Buccleuch from going to
the basement, right? He didn't want them to open the trap door in the basement.
Exactly. And
all his smuggled wine is down there, right? That's why. He's got all this Burgundy from France that's illegal.
Wine and a bunch of other illegal stuff that he's smuggled in.
Right.
But by the time they get it open, Lymond has stolen all of it. So
he's stolen all of it. But he dumps the wine, right? Because it started showing up in people's wells.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Lymond is hilarious.
Yeah, like I love that. I sort of love the fact that like he didn't have wagon space to haul the wine away, like it was too heavy. But instead of leaving it there, he just smashed it all.
Got everybody like an extra bonus in their wells that night.
Yeah. Well, and also super pissed off the smuggler guy.
Yes, but on the plus side, by stealing it, Mungo didn't get caught. He probably would have gotten dinged, so good for him. But no, there's a line where Mungo held them up for 10 minutes protesting. He claimed it was sealed, it was ornamental, it was locked and unused. So I just love the idea of him being like, that's my ornamental trapdoor. It doesn't really open, it's ornamental.
It's just here for ambiance.
Really.
I don't actually have a cellar. I just want it to look like I have a cellar.
There's so many like little Easter eggs in these that are just hilarious. I don't know, like a book without humor is just not fun. So then there's also, there's the whole metaphor of drama that I think is really interesting and relevant in the scene where Lymond breaks into the castle and interacts with his mother and the women, where, first of all, we have Lymond kind of giving the prelude to Marietta, telling her what he's about to do, and he tells her we're about to create a climacteric of emotion, we shall have a little drama. And then when he comes in, he does indeed have a drama, and there's this wonderful line describing him, drama entered mincing like a cat. And then he discusses, like the whole time, he talks about what he's doing as he does it. So they talk about the genre, is it comedy or tragedy? Is it pantomime? Is it farce? They talk about
pantomime doesn't have to be funny. It could be like,
yeah, they talk about the climax, they talk about the epilogue, and this is like his whole conversation with his mother is in these terms about drama, and I really like this because it's kind of telling the audience that this is maybe all fake, maybe this is a performance, maybe this isn't real, and Lymond knows it, and Sibylla knows it, and they're kind of having this whole conversation.
I really want his mother to like be 100% on his side. Like that's what I want. I want his mother to like, I want him and his mother to be playing a long game here, you know? And I don't know if that's what's happening, but that's what I want to be happening.
I don't want to spoil that for you, but
yeah.
So there's also,
by the way, she had 40 women at this party. Everyone had jewels on, and he just shows up, and I'm like, that's another thing that makes me think the mom's in on it, because like 40 women with like what? So
it is to some degree like the way that Dunnett sets up is like, could he possibly be any worse? Just like robbing these poor women, stabbing a pregnant woman, setting them on fire. Like, he's terrible. So there's a whole bunch of fun descriptions also of Lymond himself in this, and I think this is interesting because it's the first chapter, so I want to linger on it a little bit because it's like setting the character and setting the stage. And there's kind of like two contrasting ways that he gets described. One is all these very feminine descriptions of like delicacy and beauty, and then there's these like sort of counteracting descriptions of violence and malice. And then there's a bunch of comparisons that happen throughout the book, but also in this chapter about him being compared to animals, and in particular sea creatures and cats. Couple of ways that the narrator describes him first, and then we'll talk about ways he describes himself and other characters describe him. The voice unmistakably his, which honeyed his most lethal thoughts. She just uses words so brilliantly. His hair soft as a nestling's, his eyes graceless with malice. Man of wit and crooked felicities, bred to luxury and heir to a fortune. Like, she really makes you like not like him, but be intrigued by him at the same time. An alien and unknown yellow head rose from the serpentine depths, a nautilus from the shell. There's one of those sea descriptions. Every line of him spoke palimpsest-wise with two voices. The clothes, black and rich, were vaguely slovenly, the skin sun-glazed and cracked, the fine eyes slackly lidded, the mouth indolent and self-indulgent.
I remember that one. The idea that he speaks with two voices is a really nice setup just to, do we trust anything he says? No. Do we trust anything other people say about him? No. Do we trust what the narrator says about him? Maybe. Like, I don't know yet.
Do we trust how he presents himself? And if we don't, then why? Like, why is he presenting himself as something that he's not? What is he really doing? What's his real game?
Like, the narrator is doing a really interesting game of like value judgment, but sort of this double-sided coin value judgment. So we're not getting a description that forces us to think about Lymond in a particular way, which most narrators do. Like most like if you have a narrator and you have your main character, the description of the main character is going to be sympathetic in whatever way. But this narrator seems to be like, he's indolent and great, like golden hair coming from the water, but also slovenly.
It's interesting, I think, if you think about genre, because it's a historical action story basically, but it's also a mystery, and like he's the mystery. The mystery is what lies underneath. What is the real Lymond? What is really going on, and who is he really?
Is that mystery solved?
Yes, definitely, 100%.
Okay, good.
And actually, I think part of what makes this book really fun is that she sets up this mystery, and she sets up all these layers that he's like put in front of himself, so that it's really hard to like scratch, through and see what's inside. And she also makes him like super self-protective and really, really strong in terms of keeping people out. And so that she makes it a challenge. It's really hard to get through those things. And then she just like hammers on the shell and like breaks it open, cracks him, into like the gooey insides, and is like, this is what he is, have everything. And by the time you get to that at the end of the book, you're like, oh my God. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Cool.
So
yeah, I went to solve the mystery.
You'll get there.
I genuinely do not remember this book at all. Like, I know I read it, and I know I read the second one because like I remember the act of reading.
You must have liked
I remember opening the box of books because it was so exciting to get the box of books because I just couldn't get anything that was in English in China. But I don't remember the plot.
I can't believe you didn't read the third one, because the third one is amazing.
I don't think I had access to it. I think that's what happened, is I could get the first 2 shipped to me from Amazon. This probably was at the very beginning of my time in China, so it was probably 97 or late 97 or early 98 when I got these books. And then I probably couldn't get the rest of them. And then by the time I got back to the States, which was 2 years, which would have been a year and a half or 2 years later, I probably just didn't, like, I just never got back to it. So yeah.
And now's your chance.
Now's your chance. Because I would have sworn I'd read the whole series, but
I thought you had too.
yeah, no, I totally, if you'd asked me, I would have sworn I'd finished it. But as I was going back to read them, I realized I only had 2. And then I thought, well, if I only have 2, did I ever have the others? And then I realized I didn't.
You're in for a treat when we get to the 3rd and 4th are like really good and really like they'll hit like fanish tropes that are super.
Yay. I do love my tropes.
So a couple of other fun things. So he has kitten's eyes. That's another cat metaphor, along with the mincing like a cat. He spoke indolently, slurring his words. He has a peaceful blue gaze, but then he has blue eyes dead of feeling. And he has a careful and porcelain tread. So we have this idea of him as like delicate and neat and cat-like, but also really drunk.
Yeah. Now, is he drunk? Because I noticed there's a lot of adjectives that are describing him as drunk, like slurring his words and stuff like that. But he also doesn't seem to be drunk.
So it's interesting because then in the next scene where he's with his men, he's described as neat as a pin and stone sober. So
yeah.
It's actually an important clue that he's super wasted at his mom's house.
So he is wasted.
He's wasted. Yeah.
Okay. Because I couldn't figure out if he was wasted or if he was faking being wasted for some reason that I couldn't.
Yeah. You definitely find out. I don't know how spoilery to get.
That's fine.
So he basically he's what do I say? He had to work up the nerve to go see his mother because he's actually so delicate and fragile underneath. So he had to get wasted, and then by being wasted, he like super flirted with his brother's wife, which he didn't actually mean to do. And then when he was trying to protect one of his men by throwing the knife, he did not actually mean to stab Janet at all. So he totally fucked up. Like,
okay.
It seems this like romantic like asshole, but actually he just was like really wasted and fucked up.
Yeah. All right. That is funny because he's completely giving the air of doesn't give a shit and is in control of what he's doing.
Yeah. Well, so then there's another quote which is actually I think really interesting and explains this whole scene, which is from one of the later books. So I wrote it down. Where was it? Here we go. So this is from the 4th book. So you didn't even get this far. So this is like way further along when we know a lot more about him. We have this quote, you have all the afflictions of the highly strung, Sibylla had said to him once long ago. All your life you will have to disguise them. So that actually, in my opinion, explains everything that he's doing here, which is that he is this super highly strung, like nervous, sensitive, emotional person. And in order to function in the world, he's learned how to hide that and put up all these barriers. So every time he gets described as like peaceful and tranquil and dead-eyed, like that's the surface he's putting up, but that's not at all what's going on underneath. And the more you read the books, the more you start understanding what's really going on with him, the more you then go back to like the previous books and you're like, oh, what was really going on with him in this scene must have been something completely different than what it looked like on the surface.
That is interesting. How much do we know about how planned out Dunnett was when she wrote these? How far ahead was she thinking?
I don't personally know, but I will say that, there's 6 books. They have an ending. And things that happen in the final book are carefully foreshadowed in this book. So it really does weave a coherent story and pays off like thematically and character-wise. So I think she must have had a plan.
Yeah, that's awesome. I do love an author that doesn't insult their reader.
Yeah. So let's see, what else is fun? This one I just like. The dairy-maid skin, the gilded hair, the long hands, jeweled display their beauty.
Yeah.
And he's also serenely smiling and relaxed. So you just want to smack him.
Yeah. I love the fact that the jewels set off the beauty of the hands rather than the hands setting off the beauty of the jewels, which is what the way you would normally write that sentence, you know? So,
It's interesting character stuff. Like, how much of this is an affectation? How much of this is creating an image? Why is he creating this image?
It's also giving me a lot of Scarlet Pimpernel vibes. Like,
yeah.
So many Scarlet Pimpernel vibes. I'm like, how much of this is a put on? What is he doing? Like, as I was reading it, I was kind of like, okay, who's he gonna try and rescue and take back to somewhere? You know,
You don't see it's coming.
Yeah.
So then there's a couple quotes where Lymond describes himself that also are interesting. One is his very first line in the whole series. He says, "I am a narwhal looking for my virgin."
Yeah.
I think,
like, first of all, ouch. That does not sound good.
But, so what that's a reference to is a narwhal is like a unicorn.
A unicorn, right?
But it's also a sea creature, so it goes with the whole, like, he keeps getting described as like a sea creature. But a unicorn could only be tamed by a virgin. So like, a virgin went into the forest where the unicorn was, like, the unicorn would come to her, and then that's how the unicorn could be captured or tamed.
Yeah.
So there's like this, and also the unicorn is a symbol of Scotland. So you have Lymond aligned with the symbol.
It's also super phallic. Like,
yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But you also have this like foreshadowing of like Lymond is searching for something, or he's like looking to be tamed, or he's at risk of being captured, which is all true.
Seems like everybody wants to capture him.
Who wouldn't? He also calls himself, his sister-in-law's sea cat, sea scorpion, beautiful in the breeding season. More cats, more sea animals, and also just him kind of being douchey.
Like, don't flirt with your sister-in-law. It's a bad luck.
He says that Janet was shrinking him like a sea worm, another sea animal reference. Damned by the church and condemned by the law, 5 years of villainy. I have the refinement of a cow cabbage. From the stews and alleyways of Europe, with a taste for play acting and killing and treason and crimes they say nameless and enticingly erotic. He's like building up this reputation of himself as an irredeemable villain, which I think one of the really interesting questions is like, why is he doing this? Why is he creating this image of himself as a villain? Why is he announcing to these noblemen that he's back in Edinburgh? Why is he showing up at his family castle being like, I'm a villain?
Yeah. Like, instead of just, stealing the stuff out of the basement from the guy, he decides to go up to the room and sneeze, like, and be like, hi, I'm here, and I stole all your shit, and then disappear. And then instead of, like, somehow, there had to have been a subtler way to steal all the jewels from the ladies at his mom's, like,
I'm subtle, don't really get out there.
Yeah. I'm here, come and get me.
So why do you think he's doing that?
Well, obviously he needs finances for something. So he's gathering money to do something. I'm really reluctant to believe that he's betraying Scotland. Like, super reluctant. Like, I don't think he's betraying Scotland at all. Mainly just because I don't think the hero of a Scottish novel is going to be betraying Scotland. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. So I think somehow he's playing a game that is to benefit Scotland and probably his family also. But I have no clue what his end game is or why he's announcing himself to everybody. Like, there's got to be a point to that. Like, is he distracting them from something? Is it, is he making a lot of flashing noise over here so they ignore what's going on over here? I don't know.
There are hints in this chapter that pretty much tell you why. Think about the conversation he overhears, and then the conversation that we overhear, the first conversation with Richard and Watt Scott, where in the first conversation, Watcott and Tom Erskine are talking about Richard, and they're saying, you know, the English are attacking, and not only can we like not trust most of the Scottish lords because they're taking English money, but we also can't trust Lymon's brother because Lymon's a traitor and he won't go after him.
Right.
And then in the next scene, Buccleuch is trying to talk Richard into going after Lymond, saying lots of Scottish people are going to die if you won't go after your brother. And Richard, to his credit, is like, I'm not going to go after my brother. And then Lymond attacks the castle, and then Richard's like, oh yeah, I'm going to totally go after my brother.
Well, he could. So is he just trying to make an incredibly dramatic break, like public break with his brother, so that the Scottish lords don't think his brother is on his side, and forcing his brother to somehow pursue him in some way? Or
well, so basically Scotland is at risk, and a lot of Scottish people will die if the Scots can't trust Lymond's brother. Lymon's brother won't go after Lymond, but once Lymond does this whole like, look at me, I'm a villain, and then that is what convinces his brother to go after him. So in a way, he's just looking out for his brother's best interest and the best interest of Scotland.
Hey, you should chase me in a way that everyone can see.
Yeah, like really obviously, look at me, I'm a villain, my brother's coming after me, he's totally loyal to Scotland.
He's a great guy. Even though I flirted with his wife when I didn't mean to.
Well, definitely helps get Richard against him, but yeah.
Oh my gosh. What's gonna happen next? I don't know.
So there's a couple other fun bits. Just some fun descriptions of him. My son is not very complicated, though the artifice glitters. This criminal has cheated his way out of favor with every party in Europe. Sibylla says he has a cocoon of Attic detachment, which she's actually totally right. She's like, I see that you have this surface, that's not what's underneath. Buccleuch calls him mad, Marietta calls him insane. Johnny Bull says, hell's hell again, the devil's back. Turkey Matt says he's got a tongue on him like a thorn tree. Will calls him a silver-tongued malignant animal. And Wharton says, the very air you breathe makes me wretch. Which Lymond replies, courtesy will get you nowhere. Just cracks me up. I don't know. I think she does a really good job of setting this mythology of Lymond as this like super over-the-top character who's a villain and like, I don't know.
Such a smart ass. Like,
such a smart ass.
Which is lovely. Yeah. I'm looking forward to the rest.
So I have a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
What do you think we're meant to think about Lymond at this point in the story?
Well, I definitely think he's the hero. Like, I don't think he's an anti-villain. Like, I don't think that so the story, like, he's doing all this bad stuff, right? And people are describing him in this villainous language, but I don't get the sense that we're actually supposed to believe that part of it is his smart ass comebacks to stuff. Like, I think we just sort of believe that the witty comeback guy is okay. I don't know why, but I do think that he is not. I don't think he's an anti-hero. Like, because I mean, going back to like Spike, if we want to, you were talking about Spike and Jaime Lannister. Like, when I think about Spike, although I know that he's a villain and a bad guy, at the point where we meet him, maybe just right after we meet him, maybe not at the point we meet him, but like right after we meet Spike and Buffy, like, he's supposed to kind of be an anti-hero, but he's really not. Like, the choices that he makes almost from when we meet him are either choices for the good or choices motivated by like understandable good reasons. And I feel like that's what's going on here too. Like, I don't see him, like, if he's gonna steal the smuggler's wine, he's not gonna steal the poor old lady's wine. You know, like, I would have a hard time believing that he's gonna like cause an innocent poor person to suffer, but I 100% believe that he's gonna cause the rich douchebags to suffer. Like, That's kind of where I am with his character right now.
I would agree with you. Like, I think it's interesting because she sets him up as such a villain, and then it's like such a surprise the first time you read it, at least, to be like, oh, he's like really good guy underneath, you know, because he's like level of being a dick.
Yeah, I feel like the way that he's being described, the villainous language here is either his own language that's self-deprecating, or someone is describing him, but I don't actually trust the person describing him. Yeah. So
speaking of people whose point of view is questionable, why does Lymond accept Will Scott to join his gang?
Okay, don't know. Like, because I read that line from his men as well, like, and I was like, that was like foreshadowing with some like flashy arrows pointed at it, and you're just like, of course he's going to betray you, especially since we just had this discussion about he came back from wherever with moral like all up in arms about moral philosophy, and I'm like, he's really going to go join the like robber gang and be no.
I'd rather be with criminals who are honest about being criminals.
Right? No, that's a load of crap. Like, so I don't know what he's up to, but now I wonder, and this is just pure speculation because again, I do not remember this at all. I wonder if his intention in joining this group is to betray Lymond, or to, you know, do something he sees as ultimate good, whatever, betray Lymond, etc. But I wonder if he's going to sort of fall under Lymond's spell, like in this. Like, I could see that happening. I don't know if it will, but
it's interesting because I think that the reason Lymond accepts Will is because I think the reason he believes he won't betray him is because of Will's whole moral philosophy thing. Will swears that he swears an oath, and he's got this like really sincere belief in, you know, following through on what you swear. So I think Lymond figures, okay, he's sworn an oath, he'll be faithful to us no matter what. And Lymond's wrong, just, you know, right. Lymond is wrong a lot, actually, as omniscient as he seems. But then also I think the interesting question about why Lymond accepts Will Scott is, if you look at the context and their relationship, it's like one of my favorite things in the book. So Will Scott is the oldest son and the heir of Buccleuch, who's one of the important Scottish lords. And he basically has like run away from home and is like off to join an outlaw gang. So if Lymond is actually a good guy and he's like, this is the kid, the heir of one of the great families of Scotland, like I can't let him just go, you know, join an outlaw gang and like maybe fight for the English. So in a way, he kind of doesn't have a choice if he wants to protect Will to like take him in and like mentor him.
You can't betray me. I can't let you go herring off to somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's actually protective, even though Will, of course, has no idea and sees it as this completely abusive thing. It's more like there's all these little hints throughout of like Lymond being protective toward Will. That are just how old do you think Lymond is?
Mid-20s. I don't know.
I won't say.
Huh?
I won't say, but you'll find out eventually.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, he's got to be younger than I think he is, because everybody was younger than I think they are back then. So, yeah.
Okay, my last question, and then I don't know if you have any, but what purpose do you think this chapter serves in the grand scheme of the book and the series?
Well, it's certainly setting up a frame of this story. Like, it's setting up, like, okay, we've got Euclid, we've got his mother, we've got his gang of guys, we've got the smuggler in Edinburgh, we've got the queen who's in the, you know, she's what, 2 years old at this point, in the castle. We've got, so it's like it's just this metaphor of chess, right? It's just setting up, here's all the pieces on the board, and what, you know, we maybe see like initial moves, but nothing, we don't see the game yet. So that to me, that's what this feels like. It's like we're just getting a sense of the different pieces that are on the board, who's in play, etc.
No, totally, I agree. I think it's all that, and I think it's also like setting the mystery of what's really going on with Lymond. She gives so many different descriptors of him that are like contradictory and intriguing, so that you are like,
Yeah. And honestly, just having this conversation with you, like, okay, I like him more now than I did like 45 minutes ago or whenever we started this. But I still don't care about him deeply yet. Like, I don't, I just don't know him enough. And so I need to fall more into the story, I think, and see these different pieces move around the board and how Lymond interacts with them.
So do you have any questions? I have one final one for the end.
No, because I don't want to ask plot questions right now, because I mean, even though I don't mind spoilers, I kind of want to see how this plays out over the next couple of chapters. So I do have some questions, but I want to see if they get answered in the next couple of chapters.
Yeah. So then my last question is, what do you think is going to happen next, since you are unspoiled?
Okay, so I can't answer the what is going to happen next question, but I can answer the who am I intrigued with, and I hope shows up soon again, which is the blind girl, Kristen Stewart.
Yep.
Okay, what is going on with her? Because she's interesting. I would like to see her show up again soon. I don't want to see the Will Scott thing play out. I'd like to see that play out over a long-term thing. I don't want that to be fast. I really want him to have Lymond. I want Lymond to have somebody on his side at some point. Like, I feel like right now nobody knows what he's doing, or like nobody has a sense of, I don't know. Like, I'm trying to think of another literary comparison. I just feel like he's got all these plans and like nobody knows what he's doing, and so everyone thinks he's a villain. So I'd like someone to think that, to know what's going on with him. And then I don't know, I'd like to have a better sense of just all the players, like Tom Erskine and Bouclé and Richard, and just how they're all fitting together. I don't quite have a sense of that yet.
You'll get there. I love these things, because these are all things that she sets up for you to want, and you're already like leaping to wanting them.
Okay, good.
All right. Anything before we wrap up?
No, this is fun. I'm looking forward to it. I've never read a book like this, so I mean, I've never read a book like discussing it chapter by chapter with a friend, doing this kind of thing. So
me neither. I'm enjoying this. It's really interesting to see it through your perspective also. Yeah. All right, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you.
Take care.